Imagine you're holding like a manual that dictates literally every single aspect of your life.
Okay.
And as you're reading through it, you find two rules that just, well, they seem to completely contradict each other.
Right. What do you do in that situation?
Exactly. Do you assume the author made a mistake? Or, I don't know, do you assume the newer rule simply overwrote the older one?
Yeah, or maybe you assume the manual is just this multi-layered puzzle, right? And you just haven't figured out the specific scenario where both rules perfectly apply.
Right, right. And how you answer that question, I mean, it might seem like a super niche debate for theologians, but it actually ends up shaping the borders of nations.
Oh, absolutely.
It sparks centuries of conflict and, it determines who gets to live in peace today.
It's the ultimate butterfly effect, really. A disagreement over how to read a single sentence in a sacred text, it ripples outward until it's dictating the geopolitical reality of millions of people.
And that brings us to the core of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
So a listener reached out with this fascinating observation from their son, who's actually living in Saudi Arabia right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And he noticed something highly specific. There's this sect of Islam known as the Ibadi or Obadi school, and they completely reject this concept called Naskh.
Right, the abrogated or canceled verses in the Quran.
Exactly. While mainstream Sunni and Shia Muslims, they largely accept that certain verses were essentially replaced by later verses or traditions. So the son asked a very simple question. Why?
Which is, it's a profound starting point because unraveling why this often overlooked Ibadi school rejects abrogation, it forces us to look at some massive global questions.
It really does. Now, before we jump into the mechanics of this, just a quick note for you listening. As we unpack these ideas, we are going to be diving into some highly charged political and religious realities.
Yeah, places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia.
Right. And to be absolutely clear, we are just unpacking the facts, the history, and the ideas exactly as they exist in our sources today. We're not endorsing any political or theological viewpoint.
No, not at all.
Our goal is strictly to understand the underlying mechanisms that are driving these realities.
Yeah, we are looking at the architecture of the house, not telling you how to decorate it.
I love that. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the root of the listener's question, which is the concept of Naskh, or abrogation.
Right.
So in mainstream Sunni and Shia Islamic jurisprudence, Naskh is this recognized method for resolving apparent contradictions in the Quran.
Yeah, so if an early verse says one thing and then a later verse says something slightly different, scholars might determine that the later verse abrogates, meaning it suspends or replaces the earlier one.
Right, so the original text is still there on the page, but the ruling is defunct.
Exactly. And, this makes logical sense if you view Revelation as a process that evolved alongside the early Muslim community.
Like, the needs in Mecca were different from Medina.
Precisely. The needs of the community in Mecca were vastly different from their needs years later in Medina, so the rules were updated. But the Ibadi tradition, which is one of the earliest Islamic sects with its own distinct legal framework, they take a completely different approach.
Heavily restrict it, right?
Yeah, they restrict it or just outright reject the idea of Naskh. They rely on this very rigorous combination of transmitted reports and human reason, and they basically refuse to accept that any verse of the Quran is just canceled out.
And what's interesting is they aren't the only ones with this instinct. Like, some contemporary Zaidi Shia figures also reject abrogation.
Yeah, that's true.
But there is a parallel to an entirely different faith tradition here that I found completely wild.
Oh, the connection to Rabbinical Judaism.
Yeah.
Orthodox Jewish scholars operate on a nearly identical theological wavelength when it comes to reading their sacred text.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they completely reject the concept of abrogation based on a firm principle found in Deuteronomy, chapter 13, verse 1.
Okay, what does it say?
In Hebrew, it's the principle of lo tosifu velo tigru, which means you shall not add to it nor subtract from it.
Okay, let me see if I have this. Is mainstream Naskh essentially like a software patch?
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Like the developers realize the system needs an update for a new environment, right? So they send out a patch that overwrites the old code.
Yes.
While the Ibadi and Rabbinical Jewish view treats the text like this flawless, unalterable master code, every single line has a specific eternal use case.
Exactly.
You don't delete code. You just need to consult the manual to figure out the exact context that triggers each line.
That is the exact mechanism at play, because for Rabbinical Jews and for Ibadis, if you accept that a verse is no longer actionable, you are essentially admitting an imperfection in divine knowledge.
Oh, I see. because God would have known.
Right. The underlying logic for both groups is that an omniscient, eternal God knew the future when the very first law was given. God doesn't change his mind or, make mistakes that need patching.
Right.
Therefore, any apparent contradiction was always part of a multi-layered, perfect plan.
So how do Jewish scholars handle the contradictions then, if they can't cancel a verse out?
Well, instead of declaring an older verse defunct, Jewish scholars use the oral law, the Talmud, to harmonize the text. They contextualize it.
Okay.
They'll say, Rule A applies under these strict conditions, and Rule B applies under these other conditions.
That makes total sense.
But the crucial difference between Judaism and Islam here, of course, is the endpoint.
Right.
Jews reject abrogation because they view the Torah as the final eternal covenant. But mainstream Sunnis and Shia accept abrogation because they view the Quran itself as the final covenant.
Like a covenant that superseded previous scriptures like the Torah and then fine-tuned its own internal rules as the Muslim community took shape.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you view your sacred text as this flawless, unalterable master code, how does that actually look when you boot up the system in daily life?
Right. How does it play out?
Yeah, how does this alter the physical reality of an Ibadi Muslim compared to a mainstream Sunni or Shia?
Well, to understand the physical practice, you first have to look at who the Ibadis actually are.
Okay.
The largest concentration today is in Oman, so people often mistake Abadism for an Omani ethnic trait.
Right, but it's not.
No, it is a distinct school of Islam. You find significant Ibadi communities among the Berber populations in North Africa, like the Imzab region in Algeria, and pockets in Libya and Tunisia.
And historically down in Zanzibar, too. Right?
Yes, exactly. And their daily rituals are distinctly their own.
Okay, let's look at prayer, for example. Ibadis fold their hands in the standing position, which looks very similar to Sunnis.
Yeah.
But it differs from Shia Muslims, who typically hold their arms straight down at their sides.
Right. But then, unlike Shia Muslims, Ibadis do not prostrate their foreheads onto a small clay tablet from Karbala during prayer.
And they don't rely on the Sunni Kutub al-Sita, the 6 major hadith collections either, do they?
No, they have their own specific traditions and legal frameworks. And if you listen to the adhan, the call to prayer in an Ibadi community, it is much more streamlined.
How so?
Well, the Shia call to prayer includes a specific line bearing witness that Ali is the friend of God. The Sunni call to prayer, specifically in the early morning, adds a line stating that prayer is better than sleep.
Man, the Ibadis.
The Ibadi adhan includes neither of those additions. They also reject the qunut.
Which is the standing supplication with raised hands, right?
Exactly, the one practiced by both Sunnis and Shia during times of hardship or specific prayers.
It just seems like their entire approach is incredibly minimalist.
It really is.
There's a comparison in our sources that highlights this perfectly,
Oh.
looking at standard Sunni practices in a place like Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, yes, the Cape Town example.
Those Sunni communities have this very rich, extensive calendar of events. They hold month-long congregational Taraweeh prayers every single night during Ramadan.
Right.
They have special commemorations for Miraj, the Prophet's night journey. They celebrate Laylatul Bara, the night of forgiveness, and they hold massive celebrations for the Prophet's birthday, Mawlud an-Nabi.
And the Ibadis generally participate in none of those.
Wow, none.
None. From the Ibadi perspective, many of those communal celebrations, especially the Prophet's birthday, which actually has historical roots tied to Fatimid Shia influence in Egypt, they are seen as later innovations.
Going back to the master code mindset.
Exactly. If it wasn't in the original unalterable blueprint, it just doesn't belong in the practice.
Okay, stripping away later innovations makes total sense for the rituals. But there are these big 3 theological rifts between Ibadis and mainstream Sunnis, specifically Salafi Sunnis, that seem to go way beyond just how you fold your hands.
Oh, yeah. These are fundamental creedal differences.
Let's walk through these.
Yeah.
Rift number 1, seeing God. Mainstream Sunnis believe the ultimate reward in paradise is that believers will literally, physically see God, citing Surah 75, verses 22 and 23.
Yeah.
But Ibadis argue that God is utterly beyond physical vision. He cannot be contained in a direction or a space for an eye to perceive him.
Right.
Then rift number 2, eternal hell. Sunnis generally believe that a Muslim who commits major sins might be punished temporarily, but their underlying belief in God will eventually purify them and bring them to paradise.
Whereas Ibadis believe that if you die as an unrepentant major sinner, you stay in hell forever, regardless of your faith.
Wow.
Yeah, those two alone create a massive psychological difference in how you approach your daily morality.
But it's the third riff that I really want to push back on, the debate over the created Quran.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Sunnis believe the Quran is eternal and uncreated, existing forever with God. Ibadis, sharing a view with the early Mu'tazilite school and Shia Islam, believe God created the Quran at a specific point in time.
Yes.
My question is, why is this such a volatile debate? Is this not just an academic philosophical technicality?
Yeah.
Why would a debate over whether a book is created or eternal cause actual wars?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it cuts to the very nature of who God is.
How do you...
Like, if the Quran is created, then it's just a thing that God made. It's no different than how he made the earth or the stars or human beings.
Right.
But if the Quran is uncreated, then it's eternal. It's an attribute of God. It is almost an extension of God's very essence.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, for Salafi Sunnis, to say that God created his own speech implies that God underwent a change.
That he did something new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That he performed an action in time to create something that didn't exist a moment before. And to them, implying any change in God's eternal, perfect nature is outright blasphemy.
Wow. So it's not just a polite philosophical disagreement.
Not at all. Historically, this exact debate sparked the Mina Inquisition in the 9th century.
Right, one of the most brutal civil conflicts in early Islamic history.
Yeah, where scholars were literally tortured and imprisoned over this exact question.
And the theological friction isn't just ancient history. It has modern geopolitical consequences. Like, in the 19th century, Saudi Wahhabi forces literally invaded Omani Ibadi territories over these ideological differences. And Ibadi scholars returned the favor by condemning them as a highly dangerous sect.
It was incredibly tense.
And then fast forward to 1986, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia at the time, Ibn Baz, issued a formal fatwa declaring Ibadis to be kuffar non-Muslims.
Yeah.
Specifically citing these exact creedal differences, like the created Quran and the denial of seeing God in paradise.
Which is just a staggering diplomatic and theological escalation. I mean, you have the highest religious authority in one neighboring state declaring the entire religious majority of another state to be outside the fold of the faith.
So how did Oman react?
Well, the Omani Grand Mufti Ahmad al-Khalili responded with incredible force. He delivered a televised lecture dismantling the fatwa, published a comprehensive rebuttal book, and openly challenged Ibn Baz to a public televised debate.
Oh, wow. Did the debate ever happen?
It did not. The challenge was completely refused.
Okay, so if an Ibadi is being called a non-Muslim by a major cleric next door, how do they treat the people they disagree with? Because this brings us to the practical application of tolerance.
Right.
On the mainstream Sunni side, authorities often enforce very strict boundaries against Ibadis. There are rulings forbidding Sunnis from praying behind an Ibadi imam.
Yeah, and they strongly discourage or even legally ban Sunni women from marrying Ibadi men.
They even advise against eating meat slaughtered by Ibadis, treating it as though it comes from a deviant group.
Yet the Ibadi approach is remarkably pragmatic.
Really? Even with those strict rules?
Yeah. Historically, Ibadis allow their followers to eat meat slaughtered by Jews, Christians, and non-Ibadi Muslims, whom they refer to quite neutrally as monotheists.
Wow.
They also historically permit intermarriage. There was even a prominent Malaysian fatwa that validated a marriage between a Sunni and an Ibadi because, from a broader legal standpoint, Ibadis are fundamentally recognized as Muslims.
But how do they justify that tolerance when their theology is so strict about who goes to hell?
It all comes down to this principle they hold called wala, wabara, loyalty, and disavowal.
Okay, break that down for me.
So Ibadis have a system that separates spiritual judgment from social and political interaction. Bara means disavowing someone's theological errors.
Right.
So you can completely believe someone's theology is wrong, but that spiritual disavowal doesn't automatically mandate social hostility.
Oh. So you can believe your neighbor is completely wrong about the nature of God, but you can still trade with them, eat with them, and live peacefully next to them.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This creates this incredible irony. Because of this separation of the spiritual and the social, Ibadis can historically be more socially tolerant toward non-Muslims like Christians and Hindus than they are toward fellow Muslims who they think are getting the Islamic theology wrong.
Yes. It's a fascinating dynamic.
Like during the 16th century Portuguese colonization of coastal Oman, the local Ibadis did not force the occupying Christian population to convert. And if you look at modern Oman today, It is famous for its pluralism. You have active Hindu temples, Catholic churches, and a synagogue sitting right in the capital city of Muscat.
But, and this is crucial, Oman is an outlier. When we take these rigid theological categorizations and apply them to the rest of the modern Middle East and South Asia, the reality is incredibly grim.
Right. Just look at how the different Islamic legal traditions handle the basic right of non-Muslims to build a place of worship.
Yeah, let's look at the texts.
The Quran itself, in Surah 22, verse 40, explicitly protects monasteries, churches, and synagogues alongside mosques. It says they must be defended.
Yes, the foundational text is protective.
But when you get to the human interpretation, the jurisprudence, the major Sunni schools diverge wildly on how that applies to cities under Muslim rule.
The Hanafi school is generally the most lenient, right?
Yeah, they permit new construction in rural areas and allow existing buildings to be repaired. The Maliki school says it entirely depends on the original peace treaty signed when the territory was conquered. But the Shafi school demands the demolition of any new worship sites in Muslim cities. And the Hanbali school is the strictest, historically forbidding new construction and often even forbidding repairs.
And the Shia jurisprudence isn't vastly different in its classical city restrictions either. Even modern theory has pretty strict boundaries.
Like what?
Well, Grand Ayatollah Sistani, for example, rules that non-Muslims are forbidden from entering mosques, though he does allow them to enter Husainiyas, which are separate congregation halls.
But moving from theory to the reality of the modern state, you see how these laws are actually wielded as weapons.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at Afghanistan today. The Taliban's morality laws have effectively criminalized adherence to any religion other than their specific, ultra-strict interpretation of Sunni Islam.
It's devastating.
The historic Hindu and Sikh communities, which once numbered in the hundreds of thousands, have faced near-total erasure. We're talking about a fraction of the population left, with only a handful of temples still standing.
And it's not just non-Muslims. The Taliban's legal framework heavily targets intra-Muslim minorities, systematically oppressing the Shiite and Ismaili communities.
And then you have the devastating paradox of Pakistan.
Right.
This one is so striking because the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, had an explicit vision where religion would have, in his own words, nothing to do with the business of the state.
He envisioned a secular government for a Muslim-majority population.
Exactly. Yet today, constitutional clauses legally bar non-Muslims from holding top executive offices. Out of 1,817 recorded Hindu temples and Sikh gurdwaras that existed at partition, only 37 remain functional today.
But the most visceral mechanism of state control in Pakistan is the weaponization of the blasphemy laws, specifically Section 295C.
Let's explain how this actually works on the ground, because it's not just a strict law being applied fairly. There were 499 blasphemy cases registered in 2023 alone.
That is a staggering number.
Right, and the way the law is structured, anyone can accuse anyone else of blasphemy, often with zero evidence.
And the state is legally obligated to step in.
Yes, but the mere accusation is enough to spark horrific mob violence before the police even arrive. It has become a decentralized tool for land grabs, settling personal vendettas, or crushing economic rivals under the guise of religious purity.
And it creates an environment of total impunity. You also see this in places like the Sindh province.
Oh, the forced conversions?
Yes. Hundreds of underage minority girls, mostly Hindu and Christian, are abducted every year.
The mechanism there is terrifying. A girl is abducted, forced to convert, and immediately married to her abductor.
Yeah.
And when the family goes to the police, the state machinery often turns a blind eye, because intervening would require nullifying a voluntary religious conversion, which is politically toxic for local authorities.
So the legal system essentially becomes a shield for human rights abuses.
So what does this all mean? If we zoom out from the theology to the geopolitical reality, who actually gets to experience peace and progress in this region?
Well, if we synthesize all of this, from Afghanistan to Pakistan to Saudi Arabia and Oman, it reveals a very uncomfortable truth. Peace is not universal. Peace is entirely conditional.
Conditional on what?
Where the modern state has an absolute monopoly on violence and control, like in Oman or Saudi Arabia, you see a form of physical peace. But where the state is weak, divided, or relies on proxy militias, peace is completely absent.
And progress.
In these systems, progress is treated as a privilege. It is granted only to those who conform ethnically, religiously, or politically to whoever happens to hold the ruling power at the time.
Which makes you wonder, how did we get here? Was it always this fractured? Because there is this prevailing narrative of a historical golden age of Islamic tolerance where everyone lived in perfect harmony.
Right, but when you look closely at the history, that is a bit of a myth.
It is a profound oversimplification. Historically, Islamic empires utilized the dhimma system. This offered protection and religious freedom to non-Muslims in exchange for paying a special tax and accepting Muslim political supremacy.
But it was not an unrestricted utopia.
No. Take the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and North Africa. For long stretches, they were known for being incredibly tolerant. Christians and Jews could build houses of worship, hold high-ranking government offices.
But then things shift.
Exactly. Then you get a ruler like Caliph al-Hakim. Suddenly, he launches brutal persecutions against both Christians and Jews.
Destroying thousands of churches, right?
Yes, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and enforcing humiliating dress codes. Tolerance was entirely dependent on the mood of the ruler. It was not a codified, universally enforceable human right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we want to understand why the modern states are so rigid today, we have to talk about the profound, distorting impact of European colonialism.
Oh, absolutely.
Because colonialism didn't just passively observe these complex religious dynamics, it actively dismantled and transformed them.
It's like taking a wild, messy, thriving rainforest and forcing it into the rigid, labeled rows of a British botanical garden.
And then arming the gardeners.
Yep. Exactly. European colonial powers pushed this sweeping narrative that Islam was backward, and they tried to force these ancient, complex religious traditions into modern Western bureaucratic boxes of what is public and what is private.
Yeah, look at the British policy of indirect rule in northern Nigeria.
Oh, that's a great example.
Before the British arrived, religious identity was very fluid. You had complex relationships between different Muslim sects and indigenous religions.
Right.
But the British needed a simple way to tax and control the population, so they took those fluid identities and cemented them into rigid political hierarchies. They empowered certain Muslim emirs over non-Muslim populations, creating permanent structural divisions that had never existed in that specific way before.
Colonial bureaucracy took a world where a person could hold incredibly layered identities. A world where an Ibadi scholar could vehemently condemn a Sunni neighbor's theology as heretical, but then turn around and trade with a Hindu merchant without a second thought.
Right. Colonialism took those identities and turned them into rigid, weaponized political categories used for state control. And that is the hangover the entire region is still dealing with today.
It is an incredible thread to pull. We started with one listener's question about how an Ibadi Muslim reads a few verses of a book, and we've ended up decoding the blueprint of regional stability.
It's all connected.
It really is. So if we distill everything we've unpacked today from the sources, it seems true peace and progress in the Muslim world are currently blocked by three massive obstacles.
Okay.
Number one, theocratic governance that ties civil state law to a single, narrow religious interpretation.
Right.
Number two, geopolitical proxies that turn diverse nations into battlegrounds for neighboring powers. And number three, military dominance over civilian rule.
And to overcome those obstacles, three monumental shifts have to occur.
What are they?
First, religious authority must be separated from political power. A theological fatwa simply cannot dictate civil law. Second, minority rights need to be protected by robust, enforceable laws, not just the unpredictable discretion of a ruler.
That's huge.
And third, economic opportunity has to be distributed fairly across all sects, genders, and regions, rather than hoarded by an elite that demands absolute conformity.
It really leaves you with something profound to mull over. If historical colonialism froze those fluid, deeply intellectual religious identities into rigid political census categories, and modern states now use those exact same categories to dispense a conditional, exclusionary kind of peace, what is the actual path forward?
That's the million-dollar question.
Does true progress in the Muslim world require completely dismantling the modern concept of a state-sponsored religion? Or is the answer simply finding a way back to the more fluid, intellectually rigorous, and pragmatic interpretations of the past?
Wow.
It makes you wonder if that flawless code we talked about at the beginning isn't actually broken. Maybe we've just been using the wrong manual to read it.
A truly vital question to carry forward.
Thank you so much for bringing your curiosity to this deep dive. Keep questioning the text, keep looking for the context, and we'll catch you next time.